Have you ever found yourself caught up in a series of events you were unable to predict and realised they were somehow hurtling you into a life you didn't want? Well, hello and welcome to the Growth Mindset Psychology podcast, where we dive into the science of self-improvement. I am your host, Samuel Webster Harris, and I've been a little obsessed with how tiny decisions create massive ripples in our lives, from my own near-death experiences to watching influencers destroy themselves for views. And I've seen firsthand how currents shape everything. And today's episode might just save your life, and I'm being humble here. We are diving deep into the invisible currents all around us. In today's hyper-connected world, algorithms don't just suggest content, they actually create worldviews. Our careers don't just provide income, they shape our identities. So of course we will be learning about how algorithms might be radicalizing your uncle on Facebook, to why career paths can sweep you towards becoming a person you never wanted to become. But more importantly, the question haunting me is that once we get started being pulled in a direction, can we still control where we're heading? Or are we just another piece of driftwood? So for those of you who feel the pull of modern life but aren't quite sure if you're swimming in the right direction, by the end of this episode you'll be able to start spotting these currents that control our lives before they grab you. And the critical question I'm answering today is, how can you identify which of these invisible forces will be leading to growth and which of them will lead you to ruin? So that way you'll know. So join me as we learn how to navigate the invisible whirlpools and boosts that drive the most powerful forces in modern life, and that is your momentum. So, beginning with a story. In 2004, 20 years ago, I was bodyboarding with my best friend Jack in Cornwall, and over a few short minutes the weather turned. The clouds brooded, the swelled, and we carried on bodyboarding badly. Once we realized what was happening, the current already had us. It was accelerating us backwards and across the shore faster than we could swim. We were racing across the headland towards some very ominous cliffs where the waves were just crashing into their rocky teeth. And honestly, the human body is a very small, fragile thing compared to the power of the ocean. And I was very not keen on dying. If we were to reach those rocks, the only possible outcome was our lifeless bodies being fished out by some grim-faced lifeguard who would have to tell our mums what had happened. And little did we know that our path was already set. Our frantic paddling against the current was as effective as trying to achieve flight by flapping our arms. It did nothing, so we continued to cough and splutter right into the jaws of death. And as it became increasingly obvious that there was no way out, I had those ephemeral, is this really it feelings? And it didn't seem to matter one bit. It really was it, until, of course, out of nowhere, roared this little grey lifeboat that was the most wonderful thing I've seen in my life, and some strong hands of a grim-faced lifeguard yanked our sorry asses out of the water, and some strong motors sped us away from the rocks in the nick of time. And 5 minutes later, some strong words told us to be more careful as they dropped us on the beach. We of course shook it off, went home for a pizza and didn't tell our mums, because we were teenagers. But to say that experience has not stuck with me would be a lie, because I still think about that. Because the power of the ocean and the strong forces at play in your life that can do more to control you than any of your own personal efforts are really fascinating to me. Strong currents, of course, are not actually confined just to water systems, and we're going to learn about more of the different strong currents that exist in the world today. Firstly, social media and YouTube has some very fast-moving currents. If you linger too long on a photo of some large breasts or some rock-hard abs, you will get copious volume of soft porn coming your way. And it might seem harmless, but let's say a small ideology is something that you looked into, and that starts to get amplified. Well, things can get pretty weird. Let's say you have a little climate skepticism. That's understandable. Perhaps it's very easy for people to be fed up of hearing that eating steak means that they're a bad person, because it's a bit annoying to be told that. But if you have some climate skepticism on social media, that can quickly turn you into a conspiracy-wielding gremlin, convinced that vegetables are toxic, COVID was a hoax, and vaccines were created just to turn your brain into putty. Or equally, a woman might understandably believe that women could have fairer rights. Because, to be fair, they could. Now, online, an impressionable teenager might become convinced that the evil nature of men can somehow explain every single problem in her life. And if you want to function in a society with 50% men, that is a limiting ideology. In any example from any part of the political spectrum when it comes to ideologies, when you start fighting incredibly amplified versions of a problem, it makes life more difficult. As Fintan O'Toole said, the problem with the revolt against imaginary oppression is that you end up with imaginary freedom. Brexit, after all, was a hypothetical solution to imaginary problems. So remember, social media is a raging river of information and it's moving far faster than you can ever swim. But where it gets interesting is that social media doesn't just affect consumers, it also affects the creators as well. When you're rewarded for extremity, well, you become more extreme. Mr. Beast, after all, he started streaming pretty basic gaming videos, and these days he buries himself alive or will get hundreds of people to fight for millions of dollars. And extremification isn't always bad. He's made better content that delights more people. Or if you imagine a vague history channel about lots of different things, if they learn to focus on becoming the singular best channel that's obsessed with just the history of pandemics, that's probably a good thing as they become slightly more extreme and detailed. But in many cases, extremification can be dangerous. Imagine you're a speed flyer and a video of your close call with the ground goes viral. Your next 100 videos aren't going to be about the best packing strategies for your wing or the pros and cons of different foil weights. Your audience and sponsors will be coming from you sending your breakable body whizzing past solid unmovable objects like the ground at 200 miles an hour. And is that sensible? No. But besides just viral hits, it can really get more into your brain. For example, Louise Mensch was a respected journalist and conservative politician. She published a viral story in 2016 on Trump and Russia ties, and her audience ballooned as she started to lead the hashtag #NotMyPresident. And she ended up taking it upon herself to try and expose Russiagate. Because of this, she pursued increasingly speculative conspiracy theories, including claims that Putin had assassinated Andrew Breitbart just so Trump could give the job to Steve Bannon. At this point, Louise's allies started raising concerns about her increasingly strange and fringe views, which she dismissed as just being Trump or Putin loyalists, and she carried on ruining her career because of it. And besides the algorithms ruining your career, it can completely ruin your health. For example, Nicholas Perry was a vegan teenager making videos on YouTube. He found some traction with the adventurous eating videos known as mukbang, where people eat a lot of food. And he was, at that point, a fairly normal dude, talented musician, until his eating videos kicked off. Commenters loved it, asked for increasingly daring challenges, and pandering to an audience has now won him 6 million subscribers for his alias, Nikocado Avocado, but he did put on nearly 300 pounds or like 150 kilos, which is an insane weight gain and life transformation from being a very healthy 20-year-old to being completely morbidly obese within a few years. And he's hardly the only person this has happened to. A Chinese mukbang TikToker quit her job after finding success with eating videos, and she continued to get bigger and bigger and was hospitalized with stomach bleeding. After she recovered and with no job, she returned to live streaming with her regular 8-hour-long eating challenges. And a few weeks later, she died during a live broadcast on the 14th of July 2024. And at the time, she had 10 kilos of undigested food in her burst stomach. So I think I've made the point that pandering to algorithms can really radicalize creators. But from the examples I've given you, you might think it's only non-famous people who are trying to get views and it can turn them extreme. And perhaps if you've already found fame and an audience, then you might be immune from the algorithm push to extremity. Well, that assumption would be false. You could look at Stephen Bartlett. He's a dragon on the BBC's Dragon's Den. It's like the UK version of Shark Tank. He's the host of the Diary of a CEO podcast, which is often the #1 podcast, not only in the UK, but often the world. So he is successful and he has a huge YouTube audience. After hunting down some of the biggest celebrities he could interview to grow the show, he started looking elsewhere. He was never one to shy away from sensational clickbait, and as the YouTube algorithm was rewarding extreme titles, he continued to make more and more extreme titles. One combination he found really worked were titles or thumbnails that would claim that you've been lied to about something. As he was becoming unsatisfied with the performance of spilling the beans on celebrities' lives or wealth strategies, over 2024 he went on a spree of interviewing 18 lesser-known health conspiracy guests, and those controversial guests provided the most shocking "you've been lied to about X" thumbnails that he could find, all of course to get more views. Over 2024, his subscribers nearly doubled from 4.6 million to 8.8 million. And to achieve that, he willingly spread health misinformation like modern cancer treatments are medieval and it's better to cure cancer using the keto diet, or things like a diet alone can cure autism, and many conspiracy theories about vaccines and claims that well-researched medications are actually toxic. Ultimately, he was providing simple solutions to complex topics and put many lives at risk by driving them away from proven treatments. Purely because the truth was no longer yielding shocking growth, so Stephen just simply used lies to game the platform. And there are other famous people who've arguably been radicalized by content creation. You can look at Russell Brand. After relaunching his sober career, he started by sharing useful ideas on sobriety, health, relationships, whilst also critiquing mainstream narratives in an accessible way, and honestly was kind of fun to watch. And now he boasts pretty wild conspiracy theories about big pharma, global elites, and surveillance capitalism. Or Jordan Peterson, the respected scholar, deep thinker, he shot to fame with broadly respectable ideas on mental health and the suffering of life. Again, incredible thinker and very eloquent, and yet he increasingly tweets and podcasts about reactionary political commentary and right-wing conspiracy content. Then, of course, there's Elon Musk. His growing tweeting or Xing addiction is now 300 tweets a day, and let's just say it has had a slightly weird effect on him. And this might seem like I'm slightly deviating from growth mindset, but I'll start pulling this together. It'll all start to make sense. If you think about the climate, as it heats, we are now experiencing years with 1.5 degrees average warmer temperature. However, averages are misleading. The world is not simply 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer every day, or Fahrenheit, doesn't matter. It's still 1.5 degrees warmer. Despite that average, the weather is actually a lot weirder and more extreme. Over January 2025, half of LA was on fire, whilst half of America was locked down in snowdrifts, with record-breaking blizzards in parts of America that barely ever see snow, like Florida, New Orleans, Texas. And this weirding effect is not dissimilar to our online environment. As content fights for our attention, it gets more distracting on average. Maybe 5% more distracting every few years or something, let's say. But it isn't just the same content coming at you. It's just a little bit better, a little bit more distracting. The content is weirder. It's more extreme. So whilst we watch our real environment get trashed, is this what we want to happen to our online environment as well? We're often asked when it comes to the environment to think of the children, and we can do the same for our digital environment. These days, more kids want to be YouTubers than astronauts. In fact, over 57% of Gen Z in Britain want to be influencers. In considering the algorithms do reward radicalization, I don't think that it ends well, and I do think there's a lot of strong currents in content creation or content consumption that are worth watching out for. Okay, I've spoken a lot about content, social media, and creators. I went a bit deep into the creation things just to show you how people become extremified online and why there's more extreme content around, and that maybe some of the people you listen to aren't necessarily coming from a place of genuine honesty, even though they might not even realize they're lying to themselves, but the algorithm can actually be playing with their own beliefs, which in turn then starts playing with your beliefs. So be careful about things you consume. We're now going to talk more generally about your life, things like careers and decisions that will put you into fast-moving currents, and how we can make the most of those, all coming up after the break. As we've learned, strong currents can sweep us to foreign shores or circumstances we are aggressively unhappy about. A good wage can lead to a nice car and a hefty mortgage, and this can chain you to a stressful job and a career ladder that you can't escape from. Or consider situations like a degree that you're not actually that into, or falling in with the wrong friend group, or having Russia as your neighbour. they can all hurtle you into a life you didn't ask for. A really great piece of advice that I was told by Brian and Thomas was that the more you get known for doing a type of work, the more that work will show up. So if you do a piece of work that you're not into, you should be very careful, because you're creating opportunities for yourself that you don't want, that can create a self-fulfilling cycle that it's very hard to break. And to do some more storytelling, here's an example of this cyclical vortex played out over just a few short years in my career in software development. So I began my first and only job as a junior developer at the start of 2017. A few months later, I somehow won a hackathon building a prototype for a cool medical app. It was for quickly accessing emergency medical care. It was cool. I liked it. I wanted to build it. And I knew a business owner who ran a medical company, and so I asked him for advice. Now, instead of getting advice or maybe investment opportunities that I'd hoped for, he offered me to build his medical app idea for him. Now, being entrepreneurial and a fan of shortcuts, I was kind of keen to quit my low-paying entry-level developer job, so I started a software development agency and started building his medical app. And it felt cool, even though I wasn't working on my ideas, because, hey, I was getting paid way better. I was doing more interesting things. My first office was an Airbnb in the climbing island of Kalymnos, and I'm not complaining. Sadly, the app that they wanted built wasn't interesting. It was a glorified questionnaire that was meant to be an AI replacement for a doctor, but it was not. And the guy who I was working for had a very curious style towards getting anything done. His increasingly delusional feature requests just took us in ever longer circles, from asking us to build a shopping portal for pharmacy products to many features that I'd even had in my original app idea that I'd gone to ask him for advice for, which was a bit of a burn. But anyway, I probably wouldn't have known how to build the whole thing by myself. So after 6 months of the initial 1 month project that I'd been doing for him, we finally shipped something, and then he promptly bought 100,000 fake downloads from India, which seemed odd, as fake users don't do anything for the app's real popularity, and yet he wouldn't stop talking about how popular the app was with all these fake users. And based on his beloved fake user numbers, he tried to get the NHS to then pay him a multi-million-pound contract for delivering various healthcare services. At which point, he walked away from the team and was like, okay, I'm not going to get involved in stealing from the government. Thank you very much. So, relieved to be free from this potential fraud dilemma, I was in time to help a friend launch his AI startup. He'd built this really cool code generation project with some impressive benchmarks and results, and in mid-2017, I had his AI accelerator application, and we got accepted to join this accelerator in Hong Kong. He needed co-founders, and so I signed up to build the future of AI code generation, and a bit like GitHub Copilot or even ChatGPT these days. We went to Hong Kong to kick off, and then we spent a few months working from a remote beach in Thailand, which sounds cool. I'm not complaining again, but it was incredibly impractical working on a beach due to the lack of internet, desks, or roads. But anyway, that's a tangent. What the main issue was that all of his amazing metrics and code generation he had made up, and nothing worked because he hadn't built it. So he needed someone to actually build his magical idea, which I didn't know how to do. And I didn't fancy raising more money from investors based on a lie. And I somehow walked into another opportunity that was purely fraud. So again, I left and found myself in Singapore at the height of the ICO craze. Well, yes, at this point, let's say I was kind of experienced at working with slightly scammy individuals, it turns out, even though I didn't know when I started, and helping them work on their stupid ideas that actually would never work. So lo and behold, I was approached by a spectacular idiot who wanted me to build a Fiverr clone. We'd be building it on the Ethereum blockchain and as the payment mechanism for a Web3 marketplace. Sounds really cool. He'd made lots of ETH already from his work with ICOs, and why not take the opportunity to learn some blockchain development skills? Doesn't sound that awful, does it? Then I guess I realized that the main premise of the app was that every item should be 1 ETH, which at the time was $100 when we started. It was $300 a month later. And as ETH was so volatile, any listing on this Fiverr clone would have to be changed every week, as the value of it would be completely different. But anyway, it was kind of fun to work on, so why not? It was only going to be a few months project and I was being paid in Ethereum. No problem, happy days. Until we realized what his master plan was, which was to turn the project into an ICO, which is the initial coin offering, and basically try and steal a few $1 million from random losers on the internet by promising them magical internet money. Could it get worse? Well, at this point, my agency, which I had no plan of even starting in the first place, was becoming a hive for mentalists. The next month after that project, I had a guy approach me who'd stolen 52 Bitcoin, who I actually had on the show. If you want to go back and listen to that, I'll put a link in the show notes. And he did actually ask me to clean his stolen Bitcoin for him, which I didn't do. And he also introduced me to a hitman who I also had on the show, which I'll link to, which is quite a good interview. But not the sorts of people I actually want to do business with. And at this point, I sensibly shut my accidental agency down and started an adventure company with my friend. I quite like adventure, more than I like building apps for nutters and or going to jail. You might understandably be asking yourself, how does this even happen? Well, it's worth noting I didn't have a website, and I certainly didn't have a website that promoted my ability to solve problems for scammy people. In fact, every single project I spent the entire time fighting any of the people that I worked with some naive hope that they might decide to do something sensible. But honestly, it's like my friend Bryony had said, when you work on something, more of that kind of work shows up. It is like a law of nature. The good news is that nature is full of waves that can sometimes be awfully hard to fight, but they can be incredibly wonderful to surf. So moving on from this story, it's worth noting that currents and these invisible forces aren't always bad. They can be the most powerful multiplier or amplifier available to you in your life. If you've watched the film Naiad, you'll have seen the 64-year-old Diane Naiad who swam 110 miles from Cuba to Florida. And firstly, it's worth noting that it's impossible to swim it in the other direction because the currents simply don't allow it. 4 of her attempts failed because the currents took her off course so strongly that she was never going to make it to the little tip of Florida that sticks out, Key West. The day that she did make it, the morphing currents along her swim perfectly aligned to push her forwards towards her destination. Instead of preventing her success, they actively helped her achieve an incredible feat of human endurance in her 54-hour swim, which required both huge amounts of personal effort but also impeccable timing to make it work. Now, of course, this might sound like you need an incredibly specific set of events for a current to work in your favour, but actually it can often be more like Finding Nemo, where Marlin and Dory jump into the East Australian current with the surfer turtles and they use it a bit more like a motorway or freeway if you're an American. Sometimes all you need to do is just be in a fast-moving current that's going to the right place, and things can be incredibly easy. Bill Miller is considered one of the great investors, and he said that he was just lucky to have been invested during a period when tailwinds like a falling interest rate and expanding valuation multiples just boosted his returns naturally. If I just bought and held Bitcoin and Ethereum at the time in 2017, I would also have lots of money right now. I remember I even have a photo from when I was in Singapore of a guy giving a speech and being like, Bitcoin might be hitting $5,000 next year. Some say in 2030 it could be as much as $100,000. And now looking at it, it's like, yeah, could have just held all my Bitcoin and didn't need to do anything. Anyway, point being, just as there are plenty of bad currents to fall into, there are an equally abundant amount of fantastic ones around. A set of healthy, supportive, ambitious friends is a very strong current for your life success. A good relationship with a reliable partner will do wonders for your life. Joining a high-growth startup in their scale-up days, or maybe researching in a lab where you have a good professor, all of these things will just fast-track you towards where you want to go. And sure, these kind of situations don't happen by accident, but you have some say in the matter. Ultimately, there are a few things in life you can't choose: your family, your early education, your race, your home country and where you lived when you were young, but everything else you can hustle to create for yourself. And I think one of the most important things you can do with your decisions is to try and get into fast-moving currents. Sure, it's not always easy to choose a guaranteed success story, but it can be done. My friend joined the marketing department of TransferWise when they were 100 employees, and after 4 years of working with them, he left and joined Square in their early years until they IPO'd, and having stock options in 2 companies that then went public is very lucky, but not an accident. He built some high-demand skills that the market needed, and he went to high-growth places that could make the most of them. And anyway, if you zoom out of company specifics, there's a pretty easy recipe for success if you're willing to think about your life in terms of decades. Basically, if you get into any fast growth industry or high demand skill, and you work hard and you stay in that industry or that skill for a decade, then you will be successful. I mean, looking at myself when I worked building crypto apps in 2017, if I'd stayed in that industry for the last 8 years, I would be more than set for life right now. But there are plenty of great career options ahead of us for the next 10 years that you could be leaning into in high growth technologies. I still think blockchain and crypto is a good shout and has still got a huge amount of growth compared to much older investment industries. Then there's things like genomics and biotech, robotics and drones, ease and self-driving, renewable energy, carbon sequestration and nuclear, space, rockets and satellites, AI, LLMs, data centers, chip manufacturing in general, in fact, because all technologies need factories to build them. And if you know how to set up factories, you're insanely valuable over the next decade. AR and VR, of course, content creation, social media, YouTube, podcasting, they're all massively growing industries. And you'll be surprised what comes up. Like, I see jobs in podcasting come up, and like literally yesterday was an opportunity to be the producer for Esther Perel's podcast if you've got a few years experience. And like, how cool would that be if you've just spent a few years in podcasting? You can start getting those opportunities. But anyway, so of all the things I spoke about, it's important to note that you don't necessarily need to be incredible at maths and science to understand genomics, robots, or rockets. Those industries still need people that can do marketing, logistics, manufacturing, design, sales, buying and ordering stuff. Just hustling and getting things done is a skill. And once you're in any individual industry that perhaps interests you, if you show up reliably, if you solve problems, you will establish yourself and opportunities will just start to present themselves to you. I've seen so many people who aren't even that intelligent do really well for themselves because they just kind of show up and do what was needed. So if you are able to actually hustle and really apply yourself, like, it is so easy to get ahead. And there's lots of online doom and gloom lately predicting that in a few short years there will be no jobs at all. We'll be eking out our existence on some universal basic income. And I would say that's not entirely true. You are surrounded by potential. There will be millions of people in 5 years' time who will be thinking, damn, I wish I got into space or renewables or the biotech industry back when that industry needed people who were just smart enough to hustle and solve problems. Like, don't let that be you. Do not fear the future. Fear the fast-moving currents that are all around you that will lead you to a bad future, and jump headfirst into the currents that would take you where you actually want to go. Because trust me, there are lots of them just waiting for you to get into them. Alrighty, I hope you found that useful and maybe had a few ideas about how the world works or what you want to do with your life and how to get there. Because honestly, it's very easy to be a pessimist and it takes a lot more effort to be an optimist and actually see the world for what it is and how much opportunity there is around you. And I really hope that I can make it obvious how much opportunity there is, especially if you have a growth mindset and if you're willing to make mistakes and take risks. On that, I am taking some risks and perhaps making mistakes with my premium offering. And if you want to listen just ad-free, you can do so for just $1 a month and join the membership, which will be delightful for me. I would love to see you there. And if you are willing to pay a little bit more, you can join the book club as well, where we discuss psychology, science, philosophy, books, and you get to have a lot more interaction with me in the process. Today, we learned about the fact that the world is full of these fast-moving currents that have powers far beyond the level of the normal human energy and what we can do once we're stuck in the current. So be careful with the kinds of things you consume, or if you are a creator, be careful with what you create, and be careful about the things you commit to and choose wisely. In relationships, job, places you live, etc., the wrong decisions can be very detrimental, and the right decisions can be an incredible boost far beyond your expectations and capabilities. And with that, stay safe. Thank you so much for listening.
Go you!
Your consistency to reach the end of an episode is legendary.
My hero!
If you have any ideas or feedback for the show, I'm always interested to hear from you.
You're the best!
Studies show we need time for information to sink in, so I'm going to give you a 5-second pause, silence, to reflect on one idea from the show before you jump back into your busy life. Ready and go.